Hi, beautiful souls. It's Tan back here again today with you on this Astrology, Human Design, and Gene Keys channel. And I'm here again today with Antonia Earls. And today, Antonia has something special for us. Antonia is going to be talking about the Venus Cazimi that's happening on October 22nd of this year. It's going to be a very, very interesting time for all of us. And I can't wait to hear what Antonia has to share with us today. So I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, Tan. Hi, everyone. So great to be back again. And yeah, today we'll be talking about the Venus Cazimi. I'm going to share my screen, and that way we can go through the slides. So, on October 22nd, 2022, we're going to have a Venus Cazimi in Libra. And the reason why this is an important date is because we haven't had a Venus Cazimi in Libra since 1879, which is 143 years ago, which is a pretty long time ago.
Wow.
And so yeah, it's kind of an interesting new chapter coming in with the Venusian principle. And so I'm going to talk through a few slides to kind of explain the principle and the concept of the Venus Cazimi, what it is, and then some kind of background story of the Venus cycle in general. So, what is a Venus Cazimi? So here on the right, we have a slide from Nine of Wands, which is the website of Pallas K. Augustine, an astrologer who has done a lot of work with Venus. And so I really love their slides, their images on the Venus cycle. They're really clear and helpful. So here we have an image of Venus being conjunct to the sun in a chart, which is essentially that's what a Venus Cazimi is. It is a conjunction between Venus and the sun. And the way that this has been conceptualized in ancient astrology is that Venus is encountering the sun and then is being burnt at the heart of the sun. And so that moment of Cazimi becomes really important and empowers the principle of the planet. So the idea of a Cazimi is exactly that, is that when the planet conjuncts the sun, it empowers that planet in a way that has a global effect. Because if you think about the sun as like the center of our solar system, and then the planet kind of going into the heart of the sun, we can just kind of visualize like the planetary principles and significations emanating out from the sun, as if suddenly that planet has more scope, has more radiance in some way.
Just
And
a quick
yes,
clarification. So for the audience that are watching, if they have like a Venus Cazimi in their natal chart, or just Venus very close to the sun in their own natal chart, would you say that this part that you're talking about right now also applies to the person as an individual as well?
yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. So right now we're talking about the Venus Cazimi as a transit, but of course, if you're born on the day of a Venus Cazimi, then this principle that I'm talking about of the planet's significations being burnt at the core or the heart of the sun
Mm.
does apply to the person's life and the way that they embody themselves and those particular planets in the chart. Um, and so there's so many different variations to look at with the Venus cycle, because the Venus cycle, um, when Venus is like engaging the sun, when Venus is approaching to the sun, there are various different like subsections in that journey. So when Venus arrives at 15 degrees away from the sun, Venus is just about to go under the beams. It's just about to disappear from the sky. So when Venus goes past 15 degrees and is like closer, getting closer to the sun, Venus is suddenly becoming invisible. And that period when Venus is under the beams, but is not at the heart of the sun, that is
Mm.
going to have a completely different set of significations than Venus being at the very heart of the sun. So
Mm.
there are nuances there, and we can't apply what I'm saying about the Venus Cazimi
Mhm.
to Venus when it's a bit further away.
Mhm.
The orb that I apply to a Venus Cazimi is really 1 degree, I would say.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I'm really glad you cleared that up, just for people to kind of understand that a little bit more. Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of hard talk about all those other subsections of Venus right now. It'd be really fun to talk about it at another time because I know that it can bring about a lot of panic. Like I remember when I was researching, it's like, oh my God, my Venus is combust. Like, I mean, my
Yes.
yeah, I have a combust Venus. Venus is not Cazimi in my chart, and I remember getting really panicky about that. But it's a really I mean, just the whole cycle is fascinating, and we could talk
Maybe
about
we
that
can
another
talk about
time.
that. Yeah, another video or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so, as we know, the sun is the center of the solar system. And here we have another graph by Alice K. Augustine, who has here depicted what we call the interior conjunction. Okay, so as we know, the sun is the center of the solar system, and Venus is sandwiched between the Earth and the sun. And so Venus is in between um, in terms of like their position in the solar system. Venus is in between the Earth and the Sun. So here we have we have two circles. One of the circles on the interior is Venus's orbit. The circle on the outside is the Earth's orbit. And we have the two symbols here for Earth and Venus. And so depicted here is the interior slash inferior conjunction. And the reason why we're looking at this from the solar system's point of view is to kind of give clarity about um, what this means, like kind of in real time. So when you have a Venus conjunct the sun, this is what it looks like. Venus and the Earth and the sun are aligned perfectly on their orbits. So it's kind of like when two cars are like alongside each other, like driving on a highway, and suddenly they're at the same level. So that's what happens when Venus and Earth are at the same level. They're like meeting
Mm.
on their pathways. That's what the Cazimi is. The interior slash inferior conjunction is when Venus is sandwiched in between the sun and the earth, and that's when Venus is retrograde. So what we're looking at here essentially is the Venus retrograde. Cazimi, sorry. So there are two kinds of Cazimis. You either have a Venus retrograde Cazimi or you have a Venus direct Cazimi. So, like if you see in a chart Venus being conjunct to the sun, it either looks like Venus, the symbol, just with nothing, or it'll be Venus with a little RX next to it. If there's an RX next to it and it's Cazimied to the sun, if it's conjunct the sun and it has RX, this is what it looks like in the solar system. The exterior conjunction is when Venus is like moved the furthest away that it's going to get from the Earth and is on the other side of the sun and is in perfect alignment still with the Earth. So we have, again, a Venus, Sun, Earth alignment. That's the Cazimi. The principle of the Cazimi is an alignment between the Earth, Venus, and the Sun, except when it's direct, when there's no little RX next to the Venus symbol, this is what it looks like. This is the superior conjunction when Venus is so far away on the other side of the sun that it is at the furthest point that it could possibly be from the Earth. So they have very different flavors, right? So there are two different kinds of Cazimis, the retrograde or the direct. So I just wanted to clarify that because it's very important to understand the synodic cycle of Venus, to understand how to kind of interpret it in a chart. So the way that I like to see this is that when we have the retrograde conjunction, when Venus is retrograde, Venus is the intermediary. Venus is the one that is between the Earth and the Sun. So it's Venus that is the one that's negotiating between the Earth and the solar needs. And so I find this to have a much more practical aspect. Like when I see Venus retrograde Cazimi, it's like Venus gets to materialize itself in a very like tangible physical material way because it's so close to the Earth at this point. So it has more of like that physical, tangible quality to it. Whereas with the exterior conjunction, because Venus is so far away, Venus is kind of like grabbing onto like these different ideas and ideals that are very like high-minded and far-fetched. So yeah, Venus is far away from the Earth, is less like applying its principles to Earth things. So for example, if you had this in a birth chart, I would say that like Venus in the exterior conjunction would like be seeking out its Venusian things in ways that are otherworldly or like kind of have this other dimension that maybe aren't so practical. Like maybe like you enjoy doing things that aren't necessarily grounded in like practical reality. They're more like kind of dreamy and far-fetched and like kind of engaging with um the ideal Venusian principle. Whereas the exterior interior conjunction I see more as like very practical Venusian
Right.
kind of style.
So you would say this to be true in addition to the sign or the house of Venus. So you would obviously have to combine all of that together. Would you say that to be the
Yes.
case?
Yes, you have to layer all of this and um like it's worth noting that the Venus direct is super quick. I mean, the Venus conjunction, when Venus is direct and it's conjunct the sun like this, it happens like in a flash. Like you barely have any time. So if you're born with this, like it's quite rare because you're born at a time that such as has such a small window. With the retrograde, it has much like a longer amount of time, so there's more chance of getting that conjunction. Um, and so that, you'd add that on too. Like there are so many layers to the Venus cycle. You've got speed, you've got like where it is in the solar system, which sign it's in, which house. So like these are all the layers. But the I just wanted to like bring that nuance of like the two different kinds of Kazimis because it's adding a very important layer, I think, to the interpretation. So every single planet has a synodic cycle. The synodic cycle essentially is the cycle of the planet in relationship to the sun. So Venus's cycle around the sun is what we call Venus's synodic cycle. I think the etymology of synodic is just essentially meaning that it's like bringing three things into dialogue, or two or three things. It's like bringing things into dialogue, into communication. And here we have the synodic cycle of Venus is bringing into dialogue Venus, the sun, and the earth. When we observe the cycle of Venus over time, like orbiting the sun, it's forming this pattern here on the right, which is this beautiful rose shape. So um, the little loops that you see on the inside of the rose, those are the retrograde moments when the loops happen. And yeah, it just like it's such a beautiful pattern. I think I've attached here a video to kind of show how that's coming through in real life. So yeah, this is the dance of Venus around the sun.
Yeah. Venus and the sun have a very romantic relationship with each other,
Mm.
astronomically.
Yeah, exactly. It's so beautiful that this is the geometric pattern that we get from Venus's cycle when Venus has just naturally taken up that space in our culture as like the symbol of beauty and grace.
Mm.
So another way of simplifying the shape that Venus creates here in the synodic cycle is the pentagram. So the rose of Venus, like the pattern that we've just seen emerge from the different aspects of its cycle, form this pentagram. So essentially, what this pentagram is like a representation. Each point on the five-pointed star represents a Cazimi. So right now in our era, the Cazimis are happening in Aries, Gemini, Leo, Scorpio, and Capricorn. And it's the Scorpio. If you look down at on the right, the right bottom right point of the star here is in Scorpio. Well, that is shifting back into Libra. And that's what we're talking about today is the shift of this Cazimi backwards, because every year the Cazimi moves backwards 2 or 3 degrees. And so over time, the pentagram moves and shifts into different signs. And so they kind of the significance of this is that the Cazimi, kind of the awakening of the Venus principle by it being burnt at the heart of the sun, is kind of coming through in a different sign. So it's allowing a different sign to speak and radiate more. And yeah, so we're shifting into this era where we're no longer having Cazimis in Scorpio,
Mm.
where we've been having the Venus in Scorpio Cazimis, we are now entering into a chapter where they are happening in Libra.
Yeah, so just to clarify this, the other Kazimis that are still happening in this particular cycle is still in the same sign. You would still see it in Capricorn and in Leo and so on and so forth for, I don't know how many years, but for a while. Whereas the one that's in Scorpio is having this shift now into Libra this year. This is what's happening on October 22nd.
Yes, exactly. And so, as I said, like they are moving backwards. The Cazimis move back. They retrograde back through the zodiac sign every 2 or 3 degrees. So we are going to see different shifts happening. But, as I said right at the beginning, it's been 143 years since there has been Cazimis in the sign of Libra. So it does take a while. It has a slow kind of shift. The Venus cycle does slowly change like that. One thing I didn't say is that the Venus synodic cycle, so the cycle of Venus around the sun in relationship to the Earth, has an 8 year cycle. So the number 8 becomes important with the Venus cycle. So every 8 years, we're going to have the same Cazimis come back to the same sign. So this is the chart of the Venus star point that's happening, the Venus Cazimi, on October the 22nd. And so it's happening here at the 29th degree, between 29th and 30th degree of Libra. And so, as I said, Alexandra, Princess of Wales, she has Mars here on this exact point. So I just thought that was really fun to notice.
Right. So what would be some of your interpretations of what you think might be the energies for us during this, or, with this change in the Cazimi into Libra?
Yeah. So what's interesting to note is that, these are cycles, right? So the cycles aren't just like suddenly it's like happening on that day. There's like a build up towards that point. And, so we're already seeing symbols in our culture of like the way that this is happening, the way that this is awakening the Venus in Libra Cazimi cycle. So, I was just noticing that I think we can clearly see in like our culture now that there is just so much happening around what I would put under the bracket of like Venus liberation / oppression. So like there is an awakening in the sociocultural climate right now around the Venusian principle, and what is coming into light is like the underlying cultural oppression of the Venusian principle, and then movements to liberate it. So that's what I would say, like kind of is happening on a sort of sociocultural level. We can see it with like the movement for the abortion rights. There's like increasingly more work around abolitionism, around Black liberation, around anti-racism, around as well, just like thinking about how like what was happening back in like the 1870s, where like women's rights and like fighting for like equality of like genders, that's something that's also like coming to light around the oppression of like women and like the LGBTQI plus community, like trans rights being a big part of like our sociocultural shifts right now to like. And what's interesting is that like culturally, collectively, it's always simultaneous that as like the kind of the shadow of the oppression is like awakening in the culture, the kind of the beaming light of resistance and of social movement and activism comes up equally as strong. So that's something that we can notice like in our culture now, is just like in the zeitgeist or in like the collective brain, a lot of like chat and like kind of conversation around like these Venusian things, like about like body positivity, like being more body conscious, being more aware of like your body's needs, as well as like just like awakening like self-care like in the culture as well. Like the self-care movements are really big, like being very like kind of resisting as well like the pressure of like capitalism and being more aware of like what your body needs. Like that's something that's awake in the cultural climate, I would say. And And think about Libra as like the this sign that we associate with like justice and fairness and peace. There's a lot of work happening right now on like a social level around the restoration of justice for a variety of different layers of like our society. So yeah, it's
Hmm.
empowering the Venusian principle in the culture. It's empowering this principle in the social sphere. It's activating the Venusian through the prism of Libra, which is oriented towards justice and fairness and peace.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I'm just like kind of noticing like the social activism that is present right now, and that I undoubtedly was going to like take a radical turn, in the years to come. Because what was interesting to look at as well in this chart, as you can see, is that the Venus Cazimi at 29 degrees Libra is happening just before an eclipse. Like a few days after this, there's going to be an eclipse because the moon is just like waning into the dark phase. So the moon is going to have a new moon in Scorpio just after this Cazimi, and there's going to be an eclipse in on the Scorpio Taurus axis, which is a series of eclipses that we've seen happen over the last year. And so this is kind of um, a part of that story as well, because um, the sign of Taurus is ruled by Venus, and so Venus is like the ruler, one of the rulers of this eclipse. So I do see it as like the eclipse really helping to awaken all of this stuff. Um, yeah, and also there's like a lot of in our cultural kind of brain, let's say, there's like a consciousness around like how can we create more harmony, how can we create more peace, how can we be more in dialogue or in relationship with the world, by observing like the conflict, the hardship, like the violence that is present. Like to counteract that, there's a lot of like need for being in relationship with people, being in community, being in harmony. um
Right.
what would
I,
you have?
I
Yeah, what do
yeah,
you have?
I'm just a little curious because, these various different awakenings have been happening for a really long time, I would say. But like you said, like everything is leading up to something else. This is a cycle. So it's been leading up to this point. And so with it leading up to this point, just wondering what you felt, or if you don't have the answer, that's also okay. But just curious to see how you felt. What would you feel would be like the climax of this? Or because, I think it's not just going to start awakening. These movements for justice is not, obviously it's not just starting. It has been starting. So that in itself, I don't necessarily think would have very much to do with the Venus Cazimi, this Venus Cazimi that's happening in Libra. But then I'm just curious as to what you feel, that awakening that's been happening and it's coming to this point, to this Venus Cazimi, what would actually be the climax of it, or the change, or maybe the shift? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you for asking this question. I think that for me, like the reason why I wanted to talk about this today was also just that like there is such like yeah, it's like easy to get wrapped into this like kind of idealistic view of like, oh, it's all gonna like change, like things are gonna get better. It's not necessarily from that viewpoint that I'm taking it. It's just like an observation of like this climactic kind of momentum that's happening around the um uh, the kind of awakening of Venus in the culture around justice. So I would say that over this last year, like there's a lot that's happened already that's kind of highlighted. I mean, over the last 3 years, as you said, it's a climax that's been happening and growing for a while. So it's not like this is like unique and new stuff. But I would just say that because this cycle is happening in Libra, it's going to empower us to move into a space of collective thinking around this, because Libra is an air sign. It's very social, very communicative. While this is happening, we have Mars in Gemini that's going to be retrograding there, and it's just about to retrograde at the Cazimi point, and we have Saturn that's just about to station direct. It's so interesting, this this moment, October
Mm.
22nd, is just jam-packed with astrological events. It's crazy. I mean, the Cazimi is happening just before the eclipse in Mars and Taurus.
Yeah.
Mars is literally like 3 days away from its stationing retrograde. So it's just stationing, and Saturn is just stationing direct. So there's like an empowerment of like energy and momentum around these ideas that I've like stated today, which I think we'll just see kind of develop over time. Um,
Mhm.
and it's going to be happening more on a social level. I think it's just empowering more discussion and dialogue around this. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because it's all happening in air signs. And I thought, well, it's the perfect place to kind of give Venus a voice is
Mhm.
in like dialogue.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I also feel like in terms of like Libra, I feel being this sign that is, well, I would also associate Libra and Aries, this opposition as very like self-starter in a sense. Like there's some
Mm.
businessy traits associated with that, being the cardinal signs that does rule like partnerships and sometimes even business partnerships. And I'm just curious to see how this shift would happen in terms of the way that we do businesses and how we may embody more of the feminine or the yin type of energy in the way that we do businesses, and if there's going to be a shift in that, and what that might be,
Mm.
because there's like such a I think one of the awakenings that's maybe a new awakening, that has, that's not about the racism or not about female rights or anything, but I think it has more to do with businesses and how we are so much like in the hustle mode of business, and there's a lot of people coming out and wanting to kind of have a new approach to the competitiveness, to the hustle mode, to the busyness of the way that we used to do businesses. And how can we slow down and get in touch with just maybe like the essence of why you're doing businesses, and just having that change there. So I feel like maybe that could be something else that might come up as well.
Yes, I love that. I think that Venus I do see as this planet that represents the the kind of the economy that you have, like your energy input output. And I love that you brought that in with like the business, the business starting of like the cardinal sign, Libra. Cardinal signs have this very energetic, pioneering way of going about things. Um, and I think for me, like, because this is all happening during these Scorpio Taurus eclipses, which have like brought into our awareness like the idea of rest and recuperation, as well as like, you know, how much energy are we putting into the things that we're doing to make money, and like how can we be more caring to our own um, ecosystems, our bodies, our worlds around us. And like the way that I see this Venus in Libra cycle to me is like awakening what the writer Bell Hooks calls the love ethic. So it's like working with the ethic of love, or like according to the love ethic, which
Mm.
which the principle that she highlights in her book All About Love. Bell Hooks talks about the love ethic as like simplifying your life so that you're tending to the delicate equilibrium of the ecosystems in your world. So you are seeing your ecosystem as
Yeah,
having
exactly. Mm.
having wealth and abundance, and that if you are treating it so, and if you're honoring the ecosystem's equilibrium on all of the levels, especially on a micro kind of localized level, like the people around you and the people that you know, you're inviting in more pleasure and more love, and that in itself is very Venusian, I feel.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned that there as well. Wow.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, this emphasis on the air signs, there's just a lot of air happening here, and that has me thinking a lot about how we may use social media or technology in order to bring about these various different themes that we've been talking about.
Mm,
And I'm just getting a lot of like how sometimes the internet just kind of takes you to where you need to be, to the right people that you need to be with or be with, and listen to, and gain wisdom from. And I've just been receiving a lot of like this lead for me to kind of listen and watch people talk a lot about social media and like taking your business at a social media level rather than the maybe more traditional way of doing things. Like, for example, television is considered traditional, whereas, YouTube is considered a little bit more on the social media end of things, and kind of, having the freedom and doing justice for yourself in being able to do what you want to do and sharing what you want to share because you have this platform that is always ready for you. Because the traditional platforms are not always ready for you. You can't always be on television to share what you want to share, right? You can't always be on the radio, but you can always create your own online platform to do something and to share what you wanted to share and bring about justice in your own way. So I really feel this energy coming in as well.
Yeah, social media is a big part of this all these
Mm-hmm.
air shifts,
Yeah.
and like that we're moving more and more towards a digital age, like the digital expansion is exponential. We're just like moving more and more towards that. So yeah, like orienting everything towards like the digital sphere is like, and developing how we engage in it. And it's like changing our entire way of like seeing like our economy and like how we make money as well, just on a kind of personal level. Because suddenly you're free to make different choices. Like if you don't have to like be in an office, or like as you said, having a more traditional approach to like money making, suddenly like there are more options, it's very expansive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For
Something
sure.
else that I wanted to bring in was that, Venus as a planet, and kind of archetypally in like the cultural imagery, I think we associate a lot to just like beauty in general. It's a symbol of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
um, and one of the things that I've been thinking about is how that this new cycle, because Venus is in its domicile sign, this is something we have to take note of, is that there's the Cazimi cycle happening in Libra is worth noting, especially because Venus is coming home. And
Mm-hmm.
so with this idea of like coming home, the symbol of beauty coming home, I think that's going to be a big part of like these shifts. But also, what I've been thinking about is how it's bringing into the collective awareness the cost of beauty. The
Mm-hmm.
costs that lie behind like engaging with these higher ideals of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so one of the things that it comes into mind is like the fast fashion industry, like fast fashion, and how like it's devastating the environment, and how even though like there's more awareness of climate change and like of the environment, there's more fast fashion. There's even more like the fast fashion industry is growing really strongly, and like there's all these different brands that are happening, like really like appealing colors and styles, and there's just so much available right now. At the click of a like just in a click, you can like buy this like ideal outfit that you've always wanted to have. So I feel like the the right now the social media space, like our internet digital space, is like giving so much access to style and fashion, but behind the scenes, the BTS of this access to fashion that respond like that it is like your highest kind of like ideal of style. There's also just like environmental devastation. So, what's the cost of beauty? What's the cost of these
Yeah,
things?
exactly. Like I already can think of someone that I sort of know. I don't know if she's got something in Libra, but she has a lot of planets in Scorpio, and she's starting a fashion brand, very new. And it's a fashion brand of clothes made entirely from hemp.
Mm,
So everything is made from hemp. It's environmentally friendly. It's no longer like, because I think some of the clothes that we wear are made from plastic, actually. There's a lot of that, like especially like exercise clothes, yoga clothes and things. They have this element
mm,
of like being made from plastic. And yeah, like I can really feel that we may, just because there's just so much more freedom and so much more options available, that hey, why not choose the environmentally friendly option instead
mm,
of um going for the one that's not friendly for the environment. And I mean, Venus is coming to the sign of its that it loves, which is Libra, which is ruled by Venus. And the North Node, the collective North Node is in a sign of Venus. And so there's just a lot of, which is in Taurus, there's just a lot of this like Venusian energy that's just
mm,
like coming in. And even in terms of food, because you mentioned fashion here, and also in terms of the things that we indulge in with our mouth and getting into our stomach, and what are the costs, environmental costs or the health costs of what we indulge in terms of food as well.
Absolutely. I really, love that you brought up in the health aspect and the body. Like, I think that, as I was saying, like, it tends to be that with like great, like, that things grow equally in like shadow and light, let's say. So like, as I said, like this like crazy fashion increase in like fast fashion on like online on social media. It's so many brands doing it right now. Um, and then kind of the rise of eco-conscious brands is happening equally as strong. There's just like so much work happening around
Yeah.
being eco-conscious. So it's like rising at the same time, similar with health, the health industry and like the health industry, the food industry, and like being health conscious. And yeah, that there is a health industry too, but just like it's all kind of rising at the forefront of our collective thinking. And as you said, you brought that in with the North Node. I think the North Node in Taurus, because it's conjunct to Uranus, it's like bringing about a lot of change. Like the two signs that Venus rules, Taurus and Libra, are like being activated by the eclipses and then the Cazimi. So I feel like, yeah, it's empowering the Venusian principle even more in the collective to think about these
Mm.
things.
For sure. Yeah, it's just so interesting that you did talk about Princess of Wales, Princess Alexandra of Wales, and the fashion that was happening in those times. And now we see how that might be in the modern day, how that justice, you can say justice theme surrounding fashion might be happening in the modern day versus in the past. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something else to think about with like the Statue of Liberty that I noticed was that this is a symbol, right? It was a symbol of liberation and freedom, but by no means was the states was moving towards like freedom and liberation. It was like it's a symbol. Same as
Right.
like the fashion world is like the image of opulence and beauty, but what hides behind that? What is hiding behind all of these symbols of beauty? They're so attractive and tempting, like juicy billboards, and they just like really attractive, and you want to like devour that feast, or like that's how branding and advertising works. It just like really like plays on your pleasures and your appetite. What do you have an appetite for? Well, the culture has an appetite for freedom and liberation. It wants to see more equality, and so there'll be more like kind of probably businesses and things that are using that as like a symbol. But what hides behind that? I think more like there's even more need in these times for being careful of like not just trusting the image of something, and also and actually really like being more proactive in the behind the scenes, of like the entire ecosystem of everything that you're involved in. So yeah, if you're creating a brand, like where are you sourcing the materials from? Like who are you engaging with in this project? Who are you in partnership with? Who are you in relationship with? Like that's a very Venusian Libran thing, about like partnership. Who are you in contract with or partnering yourself to, as like an act of support? Because when you're in partnership with someone or something, you are supporting them and empowering them too. So I feel like it is a call as well to think about what are we cultivating in our lives? Who are we cultivating? What kind of relationships do we want to build? So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, there's more space to think about these things now. I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah, we haven't actually touched on the themes of relationships, which is a very Libran theme. I mean, how do you feel about that? What do you think might be coming up?
So, I mean, to me, like the way that I'm seeing this is like recalibrating the Venusian. We're recalibrating the Venusian into through the sign of Libra, which is where it finds its domicile. So yeah, Venus is coming home and like rethinking like how it enjoys being in relationship in home spaces. Obviously, like the Venus, as I said before, like the Venus direct Cazimi. So when Venus is at this conjunction, it's going to be the furthest it will be from the Earth. So, like to me, like this Cazimi is very like high-minded, high ideal, like the ideal like relationship, or like imagining the ideal kind of partnership that you could have, but
Right.
like realistic. But then the realistic aspect like will come in to that as well. But yeah, I feel like yeah, not I can't speak to the collective
I
here. Like this is not something I could speak to the
no,
collective about. I'm
I
just talking about myself.
oh, no. For sure, Antonia, you're very dreamy. No, but I was just thinking about marriages and contracts, and I think it was maybe not even so long ago. Maybe it was like the 1950s or even like somewhere in the early 1900s, the 50s or 60s, that marriage is based on, we can say, contractual negotiations and needs,
Mm,
and how that is beginning to change, in like the late, 1900s, and especially now, it's like we're really, I think, coming to this point of maybe wanting to even normalize not getting married, or even normalize divorce, for, or even the idea of just like conscious uncoupling, being happy with breaking up, and maybe normalizing that. I think these are the various different themes of justice and liberation that is being brought into light, the last, I don't know,
mm.
maybe not so long ago, really.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about this. I love what you said about conscious uncoupling. I feel like, yeah, like the idea of being more aware of like the impact that negative uncoupling has on you and your ecosystem, and like wanting to embrace the separation with more care and more love, feels very important. I mean, Venus rules, our interrelational spheres. Venus rules how we engage in relationship, how we communicate with others,
Yeah.
how we attract and draw things into our lives. It has a lot to do with community and the communal dynamic, the communal dimension of our realities. And um, having a very negative breakup has such a significant impact on our social spheres that it makes sense that we would be thinking more about that. Um, and I think that even just like um, Venus is like, I like to see as just like empowering us to seek out our pleasures and what we find to be pleasurable, and experiencing pleasures. And so pleasures are it's like an essential human right, like being able to experience pleasure, it really should be a human right. Um, and
Yeah.
in that way of like law, the law equality of Libra, of like being very legal justice oriented, very like um I think Libra is a sign that's very strict about the social order that it
Yes.
expects and what, would like to live inside of. So yeah, I feel like this recalibrating of Venus in the sign of Libra can bring about um like a desire to establish like new norms and laws
Yeah.
that
New norms. That's the word I was looking
that's
for. Yeah.
yeah, that support pleasure on its like multi levels, like not just in monogamous relationships that are leading towards like hetero monogamous relationships leading towards marriage. Like that's not the only format. And some like, the idea of like having multiple soulmates and multiple partners that are significant in your life, and not confining your idea of love to this one and only, like the only one, which is a
Exactly.
terrifying prospect.
Yes. Yeah, it's very it's an old mindset, it's not the way that things really are. And but even if you are monogamous by nature, because some people just are, but even if you are, it's like, I think we're coming to this point of like, even if you are monogamous, but choosing a relationship that is actually equal and based on, your own personal independence, based on some more Aries, maybe, of like you being independent, you being with a partner who is independent, you coming together in a real state of unconditional love and not in a state of need, especially not economical needs, which is really
Mm,
what we had in the past. And that's not the case anymore, because, in the past, women couldn't be financially independent. So there is that need on, their husbands and so on and so forth. But nowadays, that's not the case. There's just so many
mm,
avenues of making money. The world of employment has never been more awesome than ever. And so it's it's no longer necessary to be in that, mindset. But of course, sometimes this is like what I like to look at as like collective ancestral kind of karma and things like that we just take on and we don't even realize we're living that way, but we are. But to realize that and to kind of undo that, I think is something that may be happening as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think yeah, there's definitely something that has come to my attention over the last year is like kind of just like sweeping from under the rug like the of like my subconscious, like all these old ways of perceiving what relationships mean. And like there's a part of me that's probably always like I think there's a part of me that's always imagined that I needed to be in partnership to have like economic value or like to have some kind of social status, like be involved in society in some way, like with a partner, like whoever my partners have been.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's been a lot of like pressure put on the partnership itself to
Yeah,
to support my social experience or my economic experience when like I'm trying now to like kind of decondition that. And I think the deconditioning or the dismantling of the way that we pressurize relationships as giving us access to social status or power, social power is like really important so that we can be in deeper relationship with people, so we can engage in people in relationships with in a way that is wanting to commit to loving acts, to be to
yeah,
be loving to a person rather than having those expectations on them and that pressure, which is really heavy and difficult to live through, and that codependency that comes with that as well, like
exactly.
hinders love from thriving. And
Yeah,
here, when I'm talking about love, I'm not just talking about love between the couple or the people that are in a love bond. I'm talking also about just as the frequency in that person's life. Like to be able to live a life that is fulfilling, we need to be doing more loving acts. We need to be more generous with people around us. And when we're confined in relationships that are constricting us into a specific role, a specific kind of pathway of like action, we aren't available for a lot of the people in our lives. We abandon friendships, we abandon people in our lives because we're prioritizing this one person. But yeah, like for me, like kind of re-seeing our ecosystems as like an interconnected web of loving acts, and we need to nurture all of them.
yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Wow, this got very deep.
Yeah, Venus.
I know, you're talking with two Venusian ruled suns here. So
Oh my God, so much. I mean, yeah, this is all great. I love it. I could talk all day about Libra and Venus.
so yeah, now that we've talked quite a lot and very deep about the Cazimi at a collective level, how do you feel this would impact individuals at a more individual level? Like if somebody has maybe something in Libra, planets in Libra, angles in Libra around the later degrees, what do you feel about that? How would they be impacted?
This first Cazimi that's happening at 29 degrees of Libra is the beginning of a bunch of them. And so it's going to be starting this cycle where those later degrees of Libra are going to have Cazimis, either retrograde Cazimis or direct Cazimis. And so it's kind of like if you have planets at those last degrees of Libra, then this is like igniting what I would say is more of like a journey with it. Um, a new cycle that is grabbing onto that particular planet. So um yeah, so for example, I have my ascendant at 28 degrees of Libra. So I could expect that there's going to be a particular awakening of a cycle for me in like my whole life direction, because the ascendant tends to represent our entire life direction, how we make choices in life and where we direct ourselves. If you had your descendant at 28 or so degrees of Libra, then that's going to be awakening a cycle inside of your partnerings and the way that you engage in partnership and contract. So, whereas the ascendant is more like how the person makes very specific life direction choices and how they embody themselves and like yeah, express their identity. Like this has a lot to do with identity as well, like maybe like infusing the ascendant with this like Venusian like kind of like dose.
Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, that's super Venusian, big dose in your identity. um it could even be like that suddenly you want to be making art more or be more creative. Like all the things that Venus rules are like being kind of poured into the receptacle, which is the planet or the angle that is positioned there. Um,
Mhm.
so, you know, if whatever planet is there, it depends what that planet means in the chart.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I'm also thinking this in terms of like the opposing sign as well, which is Aries. So if, viewers out there have some planets or angles at the very late degrees of Aries, like 28 or 29, they may also like, have this really be a big impact for them. And it's just in cardinal signs in general, Capricorn as well as Cancer in the very last
Mm.
degrees there. Mm.
Yeah, I think that like to me, I wouldn't say that the oppositions and squares would have as like a noticeable, visible impact as like the conjunctions. I would say the conjunctions will have like very noticeable impact, and then the oppositions and squares will have more of like environmental impact. So more like things in your life will maybe take on that Venusian shape and influence you indirectly, but the conjunction will, I think, have direct influence in a very like kind of impactful way. I don't know if that makes sense about like the environmental thing of like if it's a square, if it's happening square a planet or opposite a planet, I think it will be someone in your life that's embodying that thing, that Venusian principle, and then you having to be in negotiation with it in some way. And so learning, like discovering the Venus through someone else or something else. That's
Right.
kind of how I would read it.
Right. Yeah. That can also be yeah, looked at that way. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that like on an individual level, the Cazimi, as you know, as I said, is the opening of a cycle, and it really does have more impact if you have planets there. You know, it has to be said that if you look at like the Cazimis, and if you have planets, say there was one in January 2022 this year, on the 8th of January at like 18 degrees of Capricorn, and if you have something at 18 degrees of Capricorn, that was probably a more important time for you for that Cazimi. If you have nothing at 28 degrees of Libra, it'll probably be less impactful. But there are loads of other Cazimis that will be more impactful because there's always probably one that's gonna have some kind of impact. So that's just something to note that if you don't have any planets at that degree, doesn't mean that you're not going to experience it, but it's just not going to have a as much of a direct impact. Then it is awakening a cycle in a particular house, you know, so whichever house it's happening inside of, it's still bringing that in. It's just that it's happening in that house. It's maybe less like directly you. It might
Yeah.
just be if it's in the third house, it might be like your neighbors or your neighborhood or the people that you're like your siblings that are experiencing that
Yeah.
Libra Venus
Mhm.
energy.
Yeah, would be happening in a particular area of your life. And you would experience it with regards to how you perceive a particular area of your life through the sign of Libra. Um,
Mm.
but would you take it on, energetically as much as if you had planets there? Probably not. I think when you have just planets there, it's very energetically, bodily, incorporating that into every level of your being, we can say. Hmm.
Yeah, totally. And then I would look at also annual perfections and the time boss. So whichever planet is being activated or whichever house is being activated. So say if you were in an annual perfection where your third house house is being activated, then the Cazimi is going to be important, even if you don't have a planet there. Um, so what I would say is that there is like so many other layered timing techniques that we can look at to see if that Venus Cazimi is going to have more impact. Um,
Hmm.
but then just thinking about it on a broader scale, I think it's nice to just like kind of use this October 22nd Cazimi as a time to allow the Venusian principle that we've described today, like on all of its different layers, the art, the creativity, the relationship aspect, how we engage in intimacy, how we engage in self-care, how we look after our bodies, like all the Venusian principles, and maybe like harnessing that in that particular area of life. So I'd recommend that like on October 22nd or around that date, doing like a little bit of like maybe journaling or writing of like how you want to invite that Venusian principle into that part of your life. So say if it was like in your fourth house, maybe like you could do a little bit of journaling of like how you want to make your house more beautiful, more harmonious, so that you can bring in that love principle, that pleasure principle into your home. Things like that I would recommend.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Antonia.
So I'm just going to read this like bit from the book All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. Commitment to a love ethic transforms our lives by offering us a different set of values to live by. In large and small ways, we make choices based on a belief that honesty, openness, and personal integrity need to be expressed in public and private decisions. This is Bell Hooks speaking. I chose to move to a small city so I could live in the same area as family, even though it was not as culturally desirable as the place I left. Friends of mine live at home with aging parents, caring for them, even though they have enough money to go elsewhere. Living by a love ethic, we learn to value loyalty and a commitment to sustained bonds over material advancement. While careers and making money remain important agendas, they never take precedence over valuing and nurturing human life and well-being.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, Bell Hooks is absolutely amazing and wonderful. And her birth chart is great. Like she has Venus at 29 degrees of Libra too, and she has a Libra stellium. Um, and her book, All About Love, is so great
Mm.
for, I think, contemplating how we can embody this
I mean, what you
new.
read in a way was actually quite simple, but something that we might just overlook a lot um, in the world. And when we come back to it at the end of the day, it's like, would you choose love or would you choose money and career? Nobody would ever really say I choose money and career because then you're just lonely. And the foundation of our life here on earth as human beings, we're here to love and we're here to be loved. So I think sometimes we forget that, simple understanding and wisdom. So thank you, Antonia, for reading that.
You're welcome. Yeah, I just wanted to finish with that. And I love that you talked about the simple aspect, because to me, like it's been really helpful and grounding to think about simplifying my life. And this book that Bell Hooks has written, All About Love, was instrumental in me kind of embodying that in a very real way. And yeah, I agree. We do forget about that simple wisdom.
So thank you, Antonia, for this beautiful message that you have brought to us to the channel today. If you guys out there are feeling impacted by this Venus Cazimi in any way, just comment below and share with us your feelings and thoughts, and even later in the future, maybe your experiences with it. That's it for today. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Antonia. Have a lovely
Bye.
day. Bye.